You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this and you will find strength. What if I told you that most women don't test men to reject them, but to see who they really are under pressure? What if those confusing moments, the sudden coldness, the unexpected disagreement, the silence after you spoke your truth, weren't accidents at all, but quiet tests designed to reveal your emotional stability, confidence, and self-control? Most men fail these tests without even realizing they were being tested. They over-explain, they chase approval, they get defensive, nighty, or reactive, and the moment they do, attraction silently fades. But Stoic men, they pass almost effortlessly. Why? Because Stoicism trains you to remain centered when others expect you to crack. It teaches you how to stay calm when emotions are pulled, how to respond instead of react, and how to hold your frame without force, drama, or validation seeking. In this video, you'll discover why women test men, what these tests really signal beneath the surface, and how Stoic principles give you a massive advantage, without manipulation, tricks, or pretending to be someone you're not. Watch this video till the very end. The final insight ties everything together, and once you see it, you'll never experience these tests the same way again. Number 1. Emotional pressure reveals emotional control. Emotional pressure has a strange way of exposing what lives beneath the surface. Not what you say you are, but what you actually carry inside. When tension enters the room, when expectations tighten, when silence stretches a little too long, that's when your inner structure speaks for you. You don't need to explain anything. Your reactions do the talking. And this is where most men fail without realizing it. They think the test is about words, logic, or winning a moment. It is. The test is about whether you can remain sovereign over yourself when something tries to pull you off center. Stoicism has always understood this. Wrote, if you are distressed by anything external, the pain is not due to the thing itself, but to your estimate of it. Emotional pressure doesn't create weakness, it reveals it. Or if you've done the work, it reveals control, calm, grounded presence, a refusal to be rushed internally, even when the moment invites chaos. This is what passing looks like, though it rarely feels dramatic. In fact, it often feels almost boring from the inside. And that's exactly why it works. You need to understand this clearly. Emotional pressure is not an attack, it's a probe, a subtle question being asked without words. Can you hold yourself steady when I don't make it easy? Do you remain composed when certainty is removed? Are you anchored, or are you borrowing stability from me? When you react emotionally, when you over-explain, when you rush to fix tension, you answer those questions in a way that weakens your position. Not because emotion is bad, but because lack of command over it is costly. Epictetus said, "It is not things that disturb us, but our judgments about things." This is the core skill you must build, separating stimulus from response, space between what happens and what you do next. That space is power. Most people collapse it instantly. They feel pressure and act in the same breath. Stoics don't. They pause internally, even if outwardly they say nothing at all. That pause is where self-mastery lies. You don't need to suppress emotion to pass these tests. Suppression creates tension. Tension leaks. Control is different. Control means you feel the emotion fully without letting it steer you. You notice the impulse to defend, to explain, to seek reassurance, and you let it pass without obeying it. This is hard at first. Your nervous system will resist. It wants resolution. It wants relief. But relief bought at the cost of self-respect is never worth it. Here's the shift you need to make. Stop trying to win emotional moments. Start observing them. Pressure is information. It tells you where you're still reactive, where you still need external approval to feel safe, where silence feels threatening instead of neutral. Each moment of discomfort is a training opportunity, not to perform better, but to remain whole. Seneca wrote, "He who is brave is free." Emotional control is freedom. When pressure no longer controls your behavior, you are no longer manipulable. You're not cold. You're not distant. You're simply unavailable for emotional coercion. And paradoxically, that makes you more engaging, not less. Because people sense that you are choosing to be present, not clinging to it. You must practice this deliberately. Start with awareness. When you feel emotional pressure, don't act immediately. Name it internally. This is tension. This is uncertainty. This is discomfort. Numbing creates distance. Distance restores choice. Then ask yourself one simple question. What action aligns with my values, not my anxiety? That question alone will change how you move. Another exercise, train your nervous system to tolerate unresolved moments. Sit with silence without filling it. Let conversations end without chasing closure. Allow ambiguity to exist without trying to dominate it. This is difficult at first. Your mind will invent stories. Let it. Don't argue with the stories, just don't act on them. Over time, your baseline calm will rise. What once felt unbearable will feel neutral, then empowering. You should also strengthen your internal reference point. Decide what matters to you before pressure arrives. Values chosen in calm moments are what guide you in tense ones. Without them, you'll default to people-pleasing or defensiveness. With them, you move slowly, deliberately, with quiet certainty. You don't need to prove strength when you're standing in it. Reminded himself, be like the cliff against which the waves continually break, but it stands firm and tames the fury of the water around it. That's the image you should carry. You don't fight the wave. You don't chase it away. You let it break against something solid. Emotional pressure loses its power when it meets something that doesn't need to react. And here's the part most men miss. Emotional control doesn't make you predictable. It makes you trustworthy. Unpredictability comes from volatility, not strength. When your reactions are stable, people relax around you. They feel the ground beneath their feet. That sense of safety often turns into attraction because it's rare and deeply felt, even if never consciously articulated. So train yourself, daily, in small moments. When irritation rises, pause. When impatience appears, breathe. When the urge to explain yourself shows up, let it pass. You're not withdrawing, you're choosing mastery. Over time, you'll notice something powerful. Pressure won't disappear, but it won't shake you either. And when that happens, tests stop feeling like threats and start feeling like confirmations. Emotional pressure will always reveal something. Let it reveal your control. Number 2, silence tests confidence more than words. Silence unsettles people who rely on noise to feel secure. That's why it's such a powerful test. Not because silence is mysterious, but because it removes all the usual crutches, explaining, defending, performing, justifying. When words disappear, only confidence remains. And that's what's being measured. Not how clever you are, not how smooth you sound, but whether you're still grounded when there's nothing to say. When you don't rush to fill the space, you communicate something most people never do. I am not afraid of this moment. You need to understand this deeply. Silence is not absence, it's presence without ornament. It's you standing comfortably in your own skin while others feel the urge to move, adjust, compensate. Many men fail tests not because they say the wrong thing, but because they say anything at all. They mistake silence for weakness, when in reality it exposes inner strength. Wrote, let your bearing be strong, whether in action or in stillness. Stillness is not passivity, it's restraint. And restraint is power. When you stay silent instead of reacting, you're not withholding, you're choosing. You're showing that your emotional state isn't hijacked by provocation, that you don't need to rush toward approval or away from discomfort. Silence says you trust yourself enough to let things unfold, that you don't panic when attention wavers, that you don't chase control with words. And this is where many men crack. They speak too soon because they feel the pressure to prove something. Silence removes that pressure if you let it. Epictetus said, "If you want to improve, be content to be thought foolish and stupid." Silence often looks foolish to insecure minds. They assume confidence must announce itself, but real confidence doesn't posture, it doesn't argue, it does scramble, it simply is. When you're silent, you allow others to reveal themselves, their impatience, their assumptions, their need for reassurance. And the moment you see that, you're no longer the one being tested. The dynamic flips quietly. This is why silence tests confidence more than words ever could. Words can be rehearsed. Silence cannot. You either feel steady inside it or you don't. There's no script to hide behind. No clever phrasing to escape with. Just you and your internal state. That's the real exam. And passing it doesn't require effort, it requires discipline. The discipline to pause, to breathe, to let the moment breathe too. You don't need to weaponize silence. That's not the point. This isn't about manipulation or punishment. It's about not betraying yourself with unnecessary reactions. Seneca warned, "No man is free who is not master of himself." When you rush to speak, you often give up that mastery. Silence gives it back to you. It returns control to where it belongs, inside. Here's the habit shift you need to make. Stop treating every pause as a problem to solve. A pause is neutral. A pause is space. Train yourself to stay present in that space without scrambling. The next time you feel the urge to explain yourself, delay it. Not forever, just long enough to check in with yourself. Ask silently, do I actually need to say this? Or am I trying to soothe my own discomfort? That single question changes everything. Silence also sharpens your awareness. When you're not busy talking, you notice tone, rhythm, energy. You notice what's unsaid. You notice how quickly others rush to fill the gap you leave open. That gap is revealing. And the more comfortable you become with it, the less reactive you become overall. You start responding instead of reacting. That's a Stoic muscle worth building. Reminded himself, be like the rock that the waves keep crashing over. It stands unmoved. Silence is that rock, not stubborn, not cold, just unmoved. You don't need to match every emotional fluctuation you encounter. You don't need to prove your composure. You demonstrate it by not losing it. Now let's make this practical. One exercise you should practice daily is intentional pauses. In conversations, wait 2 full breaths before responding, not to appear calculated but to center yourself. Feel your feet, feel your posture. Let your response come from calm, not urgency. This rewires your nervous system to associate silence with safety instead of threat. Another exercise, reduce your verbal explanations by half for 1 week. Say only what's necessary, nothing extra, no cushioning. No over-clarifying. This will feel uncomfortable at first. Good. Discomfort is the doorway to growth. Notice how often you speak to be understood versus how often you speak to be accepted. Silence exposes that difference. You should also practice internal silence. When your mind starts rehearsing what you should say, interrupt it. Return to the present moment. The Stoics trained this constantly. Epictetus taught that external events don't disturb us, our judgments do. Silence helps you suspend judgment long enough to regain clarity. What's important is that you don't confuse silence with withdrawal. You're not disappearing. You're standing firmly without broadcasting yourself. There's warmth in that. There's confidence in that. And paradoxically, the less you try to manage perception, the stronger your presence becomes. People feel the difference. They lean in because you're not leaning forward. Silence also communicates boundaries without confrontation. You don't argue with disrespect. You don't reward chaos with attention. You don't chase clarity from confusion. You simply remain centered. That alone filters interactions. It saves your energy, and it reinforces self-respect at a level words never could. So start today. Practice holding the pause. Practice letting silence do the work. You don't need to win every moment with speech. You just need to not lose yourself in it. As Seneca said, "He who is brave is free." Silence is one of the bravest choices you can make because it demands nothing and yet reveals everything. Number 3, delayed replies expose neediness or self-sufficiency. Delayed replies are never really about time. They're about inner posture. When a message sits unanswered, what's being tested isn't your schedule, it's your emotional orientation. Are you anchored in your own life, or are you hovering around someone else's attention, waiting to be summoned? Women instinctively probe this because it reveals something fundamental, whether you are governed by need or guided by self-sufficiency. And you feel this test long before you understand it. The tension, the impulse to explain, the itch to prove you weren't ignoring, weren't careless, weren't playing games. That impulse is the giveaway. Stoicism teaches you to look inward first. Epictetus was blunt about this. If you want to improve, be content to be thought foolish and stupid. Read that slowly. Passing the test isn't about managing appearances. It's about refusing to let your self-worth rise and fall with response timing. When you rush to reply out of anxiety, you're not communicating interest, you're communicating dependence. When you delay calmly, without calculation or performance, you're communicating that your life is already full, already moving, already governed by priorities that don't collapse the moment a screen lights up. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Most men don't reply quickly because they want to, they reply quickly because they're afraid of losing relevance, afraid of silence, afraid of being replaced, afraid that if they don't act now, the door will close. Stoicism asks you to sit with that fear instead of obeying it. Wrote, you don't have to turn this into something. It doesn't have to upset you. A delayed reply is neutral. You decide whether it becomes a threat or just a pause. The moment you stop treating pauses as danger, you regain leverage, not over others, but over yourself. This isn't about pretending to be busy or artificially withholding attention. That's still neediness wearing a costume. The Stoic approach is simpler and harder. You respond when it aligns with your rhythm, not your anxiety. You don't rush to close emotional distance. You allow space to exist without filling it with explanations. And space does something powerful. It reveals. If you feel restless in the gap, that's information. If you feel calm, that's strength. Women test this because emotional self-control predicts everything else. If you can't handle a delayed reply without spiraling internally, how will you handle disagreement, uncertainty, or independence? Tests aren't traps, they're filters. And Stoics pass because they don't take them personally. Seneca said, "We suffer more often in imagination than in reality." Most of the distress around delayed replies lives entirely in your head. The Stoic doesn't argue with the mind, he observes it. He notices the urge to react and chooses restraint instead. Restraint is not passivity, it's power under control. When you delay your reply without tension, without mental rehearsal, without silent resentment, you're demonstrating that your emotional center of gravity is internal, that you don't need constant feedback to stay balanced, that you are not chasing certainty. That's what gets noticed. Not the delay itself, but the absence of emotional noise around it. You're not trying to win a game here, you're training a nervous system. Every time you resist the urge to instantly respond just to soothe discomfort, you're rewiring yourself. You're telling your mind, I don't need immediate validation to be okay. Over time, this changes how you move through all interactions. You speak more slowly. You decide more clearly. You react less. And that composure becomes your signature. Here's a practice you can start immediately. For the next week, when you receive a message, pause, not to calculate, not to strategize, but to check in. Ask yourself one question: am I replying from calm or from craving? If it's craving, wait. Let the feeling pass, it always does. When you reply from calm, your words carry a different weight. Less urgency, less explanation, more presence. Another exercise: practice intentional silence with yourself. Set aside moments where you don't seek stimulation. No reaching, No refreshing, just stillness. Stoicism thrives in stillness because it exposes dependency patterns. When you're comfortable with quiet, delayed replies lose their emotional charge. They become just another moment in a full day, not a referendum on your worth. It's also important to release the fantasy of control. You don't control how someone interprets your timing. You control only your intention. Reminded himself daily, do what is right, the rest does not matter. When your replies are aligned with self-respect rather than fear, you're already winning, regardless of outcome. That detachment is what women sense as confidence. Not bravado, not indifference, but grounded independence. Delayed replies expose something whether you like it or not. They expose whether you abandon your center the moment uncertainty appears, or whether you stay rooted. The Stoic stays rooted. He doesn't rush to close gaps. He doesn't chase reassurance. He lets time pass without assigning it meaning. That alone separates him from the crowd. So stop asking how long you should wait. Start asking who you are while you wait. Use the pause as training. Let it strengthen you instead of weaken you. Let it show you where you still cling. Then release that grip, over and over again. This is how Stoics pass every test, not by outplaying others but by mastering themselves. Number 4, disrespect probes boundaries. Disrespect is rarely accidental. It's usually a question disguised as friction, a quiet test wrapped in tone, timing, or implication. And the question underneath it is simple: where do you end and where do I begin? Boundaries aren't discovered through polite conversation. They're revealed when pressure is applied. That's why disrespect shows up early, subtly, and often without warning. Not to push you away, but to see if you fold. And whether you realize it or not, how you respond teaches people how to treat you next. The Stoics understood this deeply. They knew that tests don't announce themselves. They arrive as irritation, dismissal, or a small violation that tempts you to react emotionally or surrender quietly. Wrote, "If anyone can refute me, show me I'm making a mistake, I'll gladly change. It's the truth I'm after." That mindset is critical here. You don't defend your ego. You don't lash out. You don't shrink. You stay rooted in what's reasonable, what's aligned, what's yours to govern. That alone changes everything. Disrespect is not about the other person being cruel. It's about information gathering. Can you hold your ground without becoming hostile? Can you remain calm without becoming passive? Can you acknowledge tension without dissolving into it? When you react impulsively, you fail the test. When you tolerate what violates you, you fail it even harder. The Stoic path is the narrow one in between. You respond, but you don't overreact. You set a boundary, but you don't beg it to be respected. You simply act as if it already is. Epictetus said, "If you want to improve, be content to be thought foolish and stupid." That line stings because it exposes a trap. Many men abandon their boundaries to avoid friction, to avoid being misunderstood, to avoid appearing difficult. But boundaries are supposed to create friction. They're meant to filter. When you hold them calmly, without explanation or apology, you communicate something powerful. You are not here to negotiate your self-respect. You are here to live it. Here's the internal shift you need to make. Stop seeing disrespect as an insult and start seeing it as a signal, a neutral data point, something to respond to, not something to take personally. The moment you personalize it, you lose clarity. The moment you lose clarity, you either explode or submit. Neither earns respect. Stoic composure does. You don't rush to correct. You don't perform indignation. You simply choose not to participate in dynamics that cross your line. And this is important. Boundaries are not verbal warnings. They are behavioral decisions. You don't need speeches. You don't need to convince. You demonstrate. You allow consequences to speak. Seneca put it cleanly, "He who is brave is free." Freedom here means freedom from the need to be liked at the cost of your spine. When you act from that place, something shifts. The test ends, not because you passed verbally, but because your presence made the answer obvious. Many men think passing tests requires clever comebacks or dominance. It doesn't, it requires self-command. When disrespect shows up, the Stoic doesn't scramble. He pauses. He notices his impulse to react. Then he chooses his response deliberately. That pause is everything. In that space, you reclaim authority over yourself, and anyone watching can feel it. Calm authority is unmistakable. It doesn't shout. It doesn't justify. It simply is. You should start training this skill deliberately. First, exercise. Spend the next week observing moments when your internal boundary is crossed, even slightly. Don't act immediately. Just notice your body, tight jaw, raised shoulders, quickened breath. That's your signal. That's where your boundary lives. Awareness comes before action. Without it, you'll keep responding on autopilot. Second, exercise. Practice neutral firmness in your inner dialogue. When something doesn't sit right, say internally, "This doesn't work for me." Not angrily, not dramatically, just factually. This conditions your nervous system to associate boundaries with calm instead of threat. Over time, that internal statement becomes external behavior without effort. Third, exercise. Reduce over-explaining. Every unnecessary explanation weakens a boundary. Stoics knew that clarity doesn't require justification. If something violates your standards, you don't need a closing argument. You need congruence. Act once. Act cleanly. Let silence or distance do the rest. This feels uncomfortable at first because it removes your usual coping mechanisms. But discomfort is the cost of growth. Reminded himself, you don't have to turn this into something. It doesn't have to upset you. That doesn't mean you accept disrespect. It means you refuse to let it drag you into chaos. You respond from reason, not emotion. And reason always chooses self-respect over momentary relief. Here's the paradox. When you stop reacting emotionally to disrespect, it often disappears. Not because people suddenly become kinder, but because the test has been answered. You've shown that your boundaries are real, not performative. You've shown that you won't fight for dominance or beg for harmony. You'll simply walk your path and let others adjust or fall away. And that's the Stoic win. Not control over others, but mastery over yourself. Not winning arguments, but ending unhealthy dynamics. Disrespect probes boundaries because boundaries reveal character. When yours are clear, calm, and non-negotiable, the probing stops. Not with noise, with quiet recognition. So stop fearing tests. They're not obstacles. They're invitations. Invitations to choose who you are under pressure. Every time you respond with composed firmness, you pass. Every time you abandon yourself to keep peace, you fail. Choose deliberately. Choose alignment. Choose the long-term reward of self-respect over the short-term comfort of approval. That's how Stoics pass every time. Number 5, mixed signals. Measure self-respect. Mixed signals aren't accidents. They're instruments. They exist to observe you, not to confuse you unless you confuse yourself. When attention comes and goes, when warmth alternates with distance, something subtle is being measured, your relationship with your own self-respect. Not your confidence on good days, not your charm when things feel easy, your center when certainty is removed. This is where most men unravel. They try to decode, interpret, chase clarity, or restore the emotional temperature. And in doing so, they answer the test without realizing they're being tested. A Stoic doesn't rush to fill the silence. He doesn't scramble to stabilize uncertainty. He understands that unclear signals don't require immediate action, only clarity of self. Epictetus said, "If you want to improve, be content to be thought foolish and stupid." That includes being misunderstood for a moment. Mixed signals tempt you to over-explain, over-invest, or overreact. Passing the test means doing none of that. It means staying rooted while things wobble around you. Here's the hard truth you need to accept. When signals are mixed, the question is, what does this mean? The real question is, will you abandon your standards to resolve discomfort? That's the measurement. The moment you trade self-respect for reassurance, the test is over and not in your favor. Stoic strength shows up as emotional non-urgency. You don't force alignment. You don't demand consistency. You simply continue behaving in alignment with who you decided to be. Wrote the tranquility that comes when you stop caring what they say, or think, or do, only what you do. That's the axis. Mixed signals are noise. Your behavior is the signal. When you remain steady, neither cold nor pleading, you demonstrate something rare, internal permission. You don't need emotional confirmation to remain grounded. You don't collapse inward when interest fluctuates. You don't inflate when it returns. That steadiness is quietly powerful. Most men think passing tests requires saying the right thing. It doesn't. It requires not saying unnecessary things. Silence used correctly isn't avoidance, it's confidence without performance. When you don't chase clarity, you reveal that clarity already exists inside you. That alone shifts the dynamic. It creates contrast, and contrast draws attention without effort. The Stoic approach is simple but not easy. You observe without absorbing. You acknowledge without attaching. You continue your life rhythm uninterrupted. Seneca warned, we suffer more often in imagination than in reality. Mixed signals invite imagined stories. Stoicism trains you to decline the invitation. You don't assign meaning prematurely. You don't build emotional futures out of temporary moods. You stay present. That presence is grounding for you and for anyone interacting with you. What's really happening is this. Mixed signals are checking whether your value is internally sourced or externally borrowed. If your mood swings with attention, you've revealed dependence. If your posture remains calm, you've demonstrated sovereignty. That sovereignty doesn't announce itself. It's felt, and it's respected even when it isn't consciously understood. Now let's talk about action, not reaction, but action. The habit you need to build is emotional containment. That means you allow feelings to arise without outsourcing their resolution. You don't seek emotional regulation through someone else's behavior. You regulate yourself. This is Stoic discipline in its form. You decide how you show up regardless of external fluctuation. That decision frees you. Here's a practical exercise. For the next 2 weeks, every time you feel the urge to clarify, explain, or seek reassurance, pause, take 3 slow breaths. Ask yourself one question. Would acting on this urge increase my self-respect or reduce it? Then act only if the answer is the former. This rewires your default responses. You start choosing dignity over impulse, strength over speed. Another practice, write down your personal standards for engagement. Not what you want from others, but how you behave when things feel uncertain. Decide these in advance. Stoics prepare for turbulence before it arrives. When mixed signals appear, you don't improvise. You execute, calmly, cleanly, without resentment. There's also a deeper layer here. Mixed signals expose attachment, and attachment clouds judgment. Reminded himself, you are disturbed not by things, but by the view you take of them. When you stop interpreting mixed signals as threats or promises, they lose power. They become neutral data, and neutrality is freedom. Passing these tests doesn't make you indifferent, it makes you selective. You don't close your heart, you protect your center. You remain warm without being needy, present without being reactive, interested without being consumed. This balance is rare because it requires inner work, but once developed, it becomes effortless. You'll notice something shift when you adopt this stance. Conversations feel lighter, your energy steadier. You're no longer trying to manage outcomes. You're managing yourself. And paradoxically, that's when outcomes improve, not because you're chasing them, but because you're no longer chasing anything. Seneca said, "He who is brave is free." Emotional bravery is staying grounded when certainty disappears. It's resisting the urge to grasp. It's trusting your values enough to let situations unfold without interference. When you do that, mixed signals stop being tests and start becoming filters. They reveal alignment, or lack of it, without you having to force anything. So stop asking how to decode behavior. Start asking how to embody stability. Decide who you are when things feel unclear. Then practice being that man consistently. Mixed signals will come and go. Your self-respect shouldn't. And when it doesn't, you pass every test without ever knowing one was happening. Number 6. Challenges assess composure under stress. Challenges aren't random. They aren't accidents. They are quiet questions aimed straight at your nervous system. When pressure appears, what's being observed isn't your words or your logic, it's your composure, your steadiness, your ability to remain centered when something tries to pull you off balance. This is why tests exist in the first place, not to provoke reactions but to reveal regulation. And if you want to pass them consistently, you have to stop seeing pressure as a threat and start treating it like training. You don't rise to the level of your intentions in tense moments. You fall to the level of your emotional discipline. That's the uncomfortable truth. Understood this deeply when he wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this and you will find strength." Challenges are nothing more than events knocking at your door. They ask a simple question: who's in charge right now, you or your impulses? The Stoic answer is always the same: you are. Composure under stress isn't about suppressing emotion, it's about not being ruled by it. You feel the surge, the irritation, the pull to react, and you choose stillness instead. Not because you're weak, but because you're disciplined. That pause is everything. In that pause, you demonstrate self-command, and self-command is rare. Most people outsource their behavior to whatever they're feeling in the moment. You don't. You stay anchored. That contrast is felt immediately, even if nothing is said. Epictetus said, "It is not things themselves that disturb us, but our judgments about them." Read that again, slowly. Challenges don't destabilize you, your interpretation does. When you internalize this, stress loses its authority. You stop treating moments of tension like emergencies and start treating them like signals. Signals to slow your breathing. Signals to soften your jaw. Signals to return to your center. This is where composure is built, not in comfort but in friction. You don't need to perform calmness. You need to practice it until it becomes familiar, and familiarity breeds confidence. The more often you remain grounded under pressure, the more your nervous system learns that nothing terrible happens when you don't react. That's when stress stops feeling personal. It becomes procedural, just another wave passing through. There's a subtle power in not rushing to defend yourself, in not over-explaining, in not filling silence just to relieve tension. Seneca wrote, "He who is brave is free." Bravery here isn't loud, it's quiet restraint. It's letting discomfort exist without scrambling to eliminate it. When you can sit with unease without being consumed by it, you project a depth that doesn't need validation. That depth is what tests are measuring. You pass challenges not by winning exchanges but by staying whole, by not abandoning your values to secure short-term relief, by choosing regulation over reaction. This requires practice, not theory, so here, where you start. For the next week, commit to one rule: never respond immediately when you feel emotionally activated. Give yourself a breath, then another. Let the first impulse pass. This isn't avoidance, it's mastery. You're training yourself to respond from choice, not compulsion. Another exercise is internal labeling. When stress appears, name what's happening inside you, not out loud, internally. Tension, irritation, urgency. Labeling creates distance. Distance creates control. This is straight out of Stoic practice, even if they didn't use modern language for it. You observe your inner state instead of becoming it. That observation alone weakens its grip. You should also rehearse stillness daily. Set aside a few minutes where you intentionally sit with discomfort, mental or physical, without trying to fix it. Just breathe and remain present. This conditions you to tolerate intensity without collapsing into reaction. Over time, your threshold expands. What once rattled you barely registers. Reminded himself, the impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way. Stress isn't the obstacle to composure, it's the path to it. Every challenge is a chance to reinforce your inner stability. Every moment you choose calm, you strengthen the muscle that makes calm automatic. You don't need to dominate situations to pass tests. You need to remain unshaken. You don't need clever words. You need a regulated presence. That presence communicates confidence more clearly than any explanation ever could. It says you trust yourself enough to stay grounded no matter what energy enters the room. So stop trying to avoid challenges. Welcome them quietly. Let them show you where you still react. Let them refine you. Each time you stay composed, you rewrite your identity. You become someone who cannot be pulled off center easily. And once that happens, tests lose their purpose. Because composure isn't something you prove anymore. It's simply how you move through the world. Number 7. Withdrawal tests outcome independence. Withdrawal tests are quiet. That's what makes them powerful. Nothing dramatic happens on the surface. No confrontation, no accusation, just distance. Fewer words, less warmth. A subtle pulling back of energy. And in that space, something is being measured. Not your cleverness, not your charm, your outcome independence. Your ability to remain centered when attention is reduced. Your ability to not chase what momentarily steps away. This is where most men fail, not because they lack value, but because they panic internally and betray that panic externally. Here's the truth you need to absorb slowly. Withdrawal is not an attack, it's a probe. And the moment you react emotionally, you hand over control. You reveal that your sense of stability was borrowed, not owned. Stoicism teaches you to anchor internally, and withdrawal tests are designed to see whether your anchor is real or decorative. If your mood collapses when attention dips, if your behavior changes to regain approval, if your mind starts running stories and scripts, the test has already answered itself. Epictetus said, "If you want to be invincible, make sure that nothing that belongs to others can disturb you." Withdrawal tests revolve entirely around this principle. Attention is not yours. Affection is not yours. Validation is not yours. When you understand this deeply, you stop reacting to their absence. You don't become cold. You become neutral, calm, unrushed. You continue to move as you were moving before, not because you're pretending not to care, but because your inner balance doesn't depend on constant reinforcement. Outcome independence doesn't mean indifference. It means self-trust. It means you don't abandon your rhythm just because someone steps back. You don't fill the silence with nervous energy. You don't start performing. You let space exist without trying to collapse it. That alone creates tension, not anxious tension, but magnetic tension. The kind that says, "I'm okay either way." And that is exactly what most people are unconsciously testing for. Reminded himself, you carry your own soul with you. When withdrawal happens, the Stoic response is not to interpret, analyze, or chase meaning. It's to return to self-command. You notice the shift. You don't flinch. You keep your standards intact. You don't reward distance with overinvestment. You don't punish it with bitterness. You simply remain steady. This steadiness communicates something words never could. You are not driven by fear of loss. Most men struggle here because they confuse attachment with consistency. They think maintaining connection requires constant engagement. It doesn't. What it requires is emotional regulation. Withdrawal tests expose emotional dependence. If your sense of worth rises and falls with someone else's availability, you're not relating, you're clinging. Stoicism trains you out of this by constantly reminding you where your control ends. You control your actions, your responses, your values. That's it. Everything else is external weather. Now here's the part that matters. Outcome independence is not something you fake in the moment. It's something you practice long before the test appears. You build it daily by choosing not to seek reassurance unnecessarily, by sitting with discomfort instead of immediately soothing it, by allowing unanswered questions to remain unanswered. Every time you resist the urge to chase certainty, you strengthen the muscle that withdrawal tests measure. Seneca wrote, "He who is brave is free." Freedom here means freedom from emotional coercion. Withdrawal is a form of pressure. It asks, will you fold? Stoic composure answers without speaking. You don't need to assert anything. You don't need to explain your calm. You let your behavior stay consistent. You don't escalate intimacy to secure it. You don't withdraw to manipulate. You simply continue being who you decided to be. You should understand this clearly. Passing a withdrawal test doesn't guarantee any outcome, and that's the point. The Stoic mindset releases you from needing guarantees. You act well because it's aligned, not because it produces a specific response. Ironically, this is what often produces the strongest response. When you remove desperation from the equation, your presence changes. You become harder to read, not because you're closed off, but because you're no longer broadcasting need. Here's a practical exercise you can start immediately. For the next week, notice how you react internally when communication slows or energy shifts anywhere with anyone. Don't act differently, just observe the impulse, the urge to fill silence, the desire to explain yourself, the compulsion to regain momentum. Sit with that urge for 5 minutes without acting on it. Breathe. Let it pass. This trains you to tolerate uncertainty without self-betrayal. Another exercise, write down what you believe withdrawal means, not intellectually, emotionally. Loss, rejection, failure, then challenge those interpretations daily. Stoicism isn't about suppressing thought, it's about refining it. Ask yourself, is this within my control? If not, release it. Repeat this until your nervous system starts to believe it. Calm is trained, not assumed. You should also practice acting from principle rather than reaction. Decide in advance how you behave when energy changes. Decide that you remain respectful, that you don't chase, that you don't sulk. Predecision removes emotional volatility. When the moment arrives, you're not improvising, you're executing a standard you already set. This is Stoic discipline in motion. Wrote, the best revenge is to be unlike him who performed the injury. Withdrawal isn't an injury, but the wisdom applies. You don't mirror instability. You don't mirror distance. You remain self-governed. And self-governance is deeply attractive because it signals maturity. It says you're not reactive. You're responsive. There's a difference, and it's felt immediately. So when withdrawal happens, don't rush to define it. Don't chase clarity. Don't dramatize the quiet. Let the space breathe. Let your calm do the talking. Stay anchored in your habits, your purpose, your direction. Outcome independence isn't about winning the interaction. It's about not losing yourself inside it. And when you stop losing yourself, you stop failing tests you never agreed to take in the first place. Number 8, provocation checks ego mastery. Provocation is never random. It's a quiet probe, a subtle pressure applied to see what spills out of you when things don't go your way. And what's being tested isn't your wit, your dominance, or your clever comebacks. It's your ego. Specifically, whether you are ruled by it or whether you've trained it to stand down when challenged. This is where most men fail without even realizing it. They think the moment calls for defense, correction, or escalation. But what's really being observed is whether you can remain internally unmoved, while the external world nudges you off balance. The Stoics understood this deeply. They knew that the quickest way to expose a person's inner disorder is to poke their sense of self-importance. That's why reminded himself, if you are distressed by anything external, the pain is not due to the thing itself, but to your estimate of it. Provocation only works if you agree to the story it's trying to tell you. The moment you feel the urge to react, to prove, to straighten the record, to reclaim status, that's the moment your ego has taken the wheel. And when that happens, composure disappears, presence fractures, the test is failed. Here's the truth you need to absorb. Passing these tests has nothing to do with appearing unbothered on the surface. Anyone can fake calm for a few seconds. What matters is whether you are calm, whether your sense of worth stays intact even when you're poked, teased, questioned, or misunderstood. Provocation is designed to see if your identity is rigid or relaxed. If it's rigid, it cracks under pressure. If it's relaxed, it bends and returns to center without effort. Ego wants to respond immediately. It wants resolution, recognition, and reassurance. It whispers that silence equals weakness and that restraint means you're losing ground. Stoicism teaches the opposite. It teaches that restraint is strength refined. Epictetus put it plainly, "It is not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters." The pause between stimulus and response is where mastery lies. That pause is everything. In it, you choose whether you will be governed by impulse or by principle. You don't pass provocation checks by being passive. You pass them by being sovereign. You decide when engagement is necessary and when it's beneath your attention. That discernment is felt immediately. There's a difference between indifference and indifference with awareness. One is avoidance, the other is power. When you stop reacting automatically, your presence changes. You become less predictable, less controllable, less reactive. That creates tension, not anxious tension, but grounded tension. The kind that makes people pay attention. Seneca warned, "He who is brave is free." Ego reactivity is a form of bondage. Every provocation becomes a leash. Someone tugs, you move. Someone questions you, you explain. Someone doubts you, you perform. Stoic ego mastery cuts the leash entirely. You no longer outsource your emotional state to other people's behavior. You stop needing to win every exchange. And ironically, the moment you stop trying to win, you become far more compelling. What's important here is understanding that provocation isn't about the words being used. It's about emotional leverage. The test asks, can this person be pulled out of their center? Can they be made to chase validation? Can they be baited into overinvestment? If the answer is yes, the testing escalates. If the answer is no, something interesting happens. Respect grows, not loud respect, quiet respect. The kind that doesn't announce itself but shifts the dynamic permanently. You train for this the same way Stoics train for hardship, through deliberate practice. Start by noticing your internal signals, the tightening in your chest, the urge to interrupt, the mental rehearsal of what you should say. These are cues, not commands. The moment you notice them, you're already ahead. Instead of obeying them, observe them. Let them rise and fall without action. This alone weakens ego's grip. Here's a simple exercise. For the next week, whenever you feel provoked, even mildly, commit to delaying your response by 3 full breaths. No exceptions. You don't need to be silent forever. You just need to create space. In those breaths, remind yourself of this Stoic anchor. I control my judgments, nothing else. That reminder it shifts your attention inward where your power actually lives. Another practice is voluntary discomfort. Stoics believed in training the mind by choosing difficulty on purpose. Do things that bruise the ego slightly without fixing them. Let misunderstandings exist. Let someone else have the last word. Let a moment pass without asserting yourself, not as suppression but as discipline. You are teaching yourself that your worth doesn't erode just because you didn't react. Over time, this builds an unshakable calm. Not numbness, stability. You'll notice that as your ego quiets, your intuition sharpens. You'll know when a response is necessary and when it's a trap. You'll stop confusing urgency with importance. That's when you begin to pass these tests effortlessly. Not because you've memorized techniques, but because your internal posture has changed. You're no longer trying to manage impressions. You're managing yourself. wrote, "The best revenge is to be unlike him who performed the injury." Applied here, the best response to provocation is not mirroring chaos with chaos. It's remaining ordered when disorder is invited. That order is felt. It's unsettling to people who rely on emotional reactions to navigate interactions, and it's deeply attractive to those who value strength that doesn't need to announce itself. So take this seriously. Ego mastery isn't a personality trait, it's a practice, one you return to daily. Every provocation is a training opportunity. Every urge to react is a chance to choose discipline instead. You don't need to suppress who you are. You need to refine it. When you do, tests stop feeling like threats and start feeling like confirmations. You'll know quietly and confidently that you passed, without having to prove it to anyone. Number 9. Uncertainty reveals inner stability. Uncertainty is not the enemy you were taught to fear. It's the arena. It's the pressure that exposes what's solid and what's hollow inside you. When things feel unclear, when signals aren't clean, when outcomes aren't guaranteed, that's when inner stability either shows up or collapses. This is why uncertainty becomes a test. Not because someone is trying to trap you, but because uncertainty strips away performance. It removes scripts. It reveals whether your sense of self can stand without constant reassurance. And when you can remain calm, grounded, and self-directed in that space, something powerful happens. You pass without trying. Most men rush to resolve uncertainty. They explain too much. They clarify too fast. They seek emotional closure as if ambiguity were dangerous. But Stoics understood something deeper. They knew that the need for certainty is often just disguised fear. Epictetus said, "If you want to improve, be content to be thought foolish and stupid." In other words, stop needing to control how things look. Stop rushing to correct perceptions. When you allow uncertainty to exist without panicking, you signal inner order. You show that your center is not external. Here's the truth you need to absorb. Uncertainty doesn't destabilize you. It reveals whether you were stable to begin with. When you're anchored internally, ambiguity doesn't trigger overreaction. You don't grasp for guarantees. You don't rush to secure outcomes. You remain present. That presence is rare, and rarity is felt. When you don't chase clarity, clarity often comes to you, not because you demanded it, but because your composure created space. Wrote, "It is not death that a man should fear, but he should fear never beginning to live." Replace death with uncertainty, and the meaning still holds. When you avoid uncertain moments, you avoid growth. You avoid strength. You avoid depth. Stoics didn't try to eliminate discomfort. They trained themselves to function within it. That's what makes uncertainty such a revealing force. It asks one question: can you stay yourself when nothing is guaranteed? You don't need to prove calm. Calm proves itself. When uncertainty shows up and you don't scramble, you communicate something without words. You trust yourself more than outcomes. That alone shifts dynamics. You stop being reactive. You stop being pulled. You become steady. And steadiness is deeply compelling because it suggests emotional self-sufficiency. It says you are not here to be completed. You are already whole. This doesn't mean you become passive or detached. It means you stop emotionally leaning forward. You stop trying to manage perceptions. You allow silence. You allow pauses. You allow things to unfold without forcing direction. Seneca said, "He who suffers before it is necessary suffers more than is necessary." Most suffering comes from imagined futures. When you stay rooted in the present, uncertainty loses its bite. It becomes neutral ground instead of a threat. Here, where you need to train yourself. Start noticing your internal reactions when things aren't clear. Not your external behavior, your internal urgency, that tightening in the chest, that impulse to act just to feel relief. Don't suppress it. Observe it. Advised, you have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this and you will find strength. Every time you choose not to react immediately, you reclaim that power. You teach yourself that you can sit in the unknown without falling apart. A simple daily practice: delay unnecessary responses, not as a tactic but as a discipline. When you feel the urge to immediately clarify, reassure, or secure, pause, take a breath. Ask yourself, am I acting from alignment or anxiety? Then act only if it's alignment. This rewires your nervous system. Over time, uncertainty stops feeling like danger and starts feeling like space. Another exercise: intentionally remove the need to be understood. For a set period, commit to not correcting assumptions unless absolutely required. Let people think what they think. This strengthens your internal reference point. Epictetus reminded his students, if anyone tells you that a certain person speaks ill of you, do not make excuses about what is said of you but answer, he was ignorant of my other faults, else he would not have mentioned these alone. That's not arrogance. That's emotional independence. You don't collapse when perception wobbles. Inner stability means your identity isn't up for negotiation every time conditions change. You don't become more or less yourself based on reactions. You remain consistent. And consistency under uncertainty feels like quiet authority. It's not loud. It doesn't announce itself. It's sensed. When you don't rush to fill silence, silence works in your favor. When you don't chase reassurance, reassurance becomes unnecessary. You should also train your body to tolerate uncertainty. Stillness is a practice. Sit without stimulation. Let thoughts rise and fall without chasing them. This builds psychological endurance. Stoics practiced voluntary discomfort for this exact reason. Not to suffer, but to realize they could remain intact when comfort disappeared. Seneca wrote, "Set aside a certain number of days, during which you shall be content with the scantiest and cheapest fare, and ask yourself, is this what I feared?" The lesson is simple. Most fears dissolve when faced directly. As you grow into this, something shifts in how you move through the world. You stop performing confidence and start embodying it. You don't need certainty to act with dignity. You don't need guarantees to stay grounded. You trust your ability to respond, not your ability to predict. That trust is the foundation of inner stability. So don't rush the unknown. Don't try to master it. Let it test you. Let it show you where you're still attached, still reactive, still seeking control. Then strengthen those areas quietly. Each time you remain calm where you once would have panicked, you evolve. Each time you stay centered when outcomes are unclear, you pass without effort. Uncertainty is not a hurdle, it's the mirror. Stand still long enough and it will show you exactly who you are. Number 10, consistency exposes true character. Consistency is the quiet force that reveals who you really are when no one is impressed by your words anymore. It's not dramatic, it doesn't rush, it simply stays the same. And that's exactly why it exposes true character. Tests happen when emotions rise, when expectations shift, when pressure appears out of nowhere. In those moments, inconsistency shows cracks immediately. But when you are consistent, calm in tone, steady in values, predictable in your boundaries, you pass without trying. Not because you outsmarted anything, but because there was nothing to exploit. Stoicism has always emphasized this, not as a performance but as a way of being. Reminded himself, be like the rock that the waves keep crashing over. It stands unmoved and the raging of the sea still falls asleep around it. Consistency is that rock. You don't change who you are based on moods, reactions, or shifting dynamics. You don't become warmer to gain approval or colder to regain control. You remain aligned. And alignment is deeply unsettling to anyone trying to provoke a reaction, because there's nothing to hook into. Here's the truth you need to accept if you want to grow. Inconsistency is often disguised as flexibility. You tell yourself you're adapting, being understanding, keeping the peace, but more often than not, you're abandoning your center. One day you're decisive, the next day unsure. One moment you're firm, the next overly accommodating. That swing creates uncertainty. And uncertainty invites testing because people naturally probe what feels unstable. Consistency shuts that down, not through force but through clarity. Epictetus said, "If you wish to be invincible, make yourself indifferent to things that are not within your control." Consistency is built on that indifference. You stop reacting to emotional spikes. You stop adjusting your behavior to chase a desired response. Instead, you act from principle. Same values on good days. Same standards on difficult days. Same composure when praised or challenged. Over time, this becomes unmistakable. People stop guessing where you stand because you've shown them repeatedly. This is where most men get it wrong. They think passing tests requires clever responses or perfect timing. It doesn't. It requires sameness, not boredom, steadiness. When your tone doesn't shift under pressure, when your decisions don't wobble under uncertainty, when your energy remains grounded regardless of what's thrown at you, there's no leverage. You're no longer reactive. And when you're not reactive, control dissolves. Consistency also removes the need to explain yourself. You don't argue your values. You don't defend your boundaries. You don't justify your pace. You simply act the same way every time the situation calls for it. Over time, this builds a reputation that speaks before you do. And that reputation creates trust, not emotional dependency, but respect. Respect is the foundation that ends games before they begin. Seneca wrote, "He who is brave is free." Consistency is courage practiced daily. It's the courage to remain yourself even when it would be easier to bend, easier to perform, easier to smooth things over. But every time you choose steadiness over appeasement, you strengthen your core. You teach your nervous system that stability is safe. And once that happens, your presence changes. You stop scanning for reactions. You stop adjusting mid-sentence. You stop second-guessing your instincts. Now let's make this practical. Start with one rule: your tone stays the same, not flat, not cold, calm and grounded. Practice responding internally before you ever speak. Slow your breath. Let the impulse pass. Then respond from your baseline, not the spike. This alone will transform how you're perceived. Emotional consistency is rare. Most people live in reaction. When you don't, you stand out quietly. Next, define what consistency means for you. Choose 3 behaviors you will maintain no matter what. This isn't about outcomes, it's about conduct. Decide how you speak, how you decide, how you disengage. Write them down. Read them daily. Act on them even when it feels inconvenient, especially when it feels inconvenient. This is where character is forged. Another exercise: track moments where you feel tempted to act out of alignment. Don't analyze the other person. Don't justify the urge. Just notice it. Then choose the consistent response anyway. Over time, this becomes automatic. Your mind learns that integrity doesn't require effort, it requires repetition. Also said, the best revenge is to be unlike him who performed the injury. Consistency is that difference. You don't mirror chaos. You don't escalate emotion. You don't match instability. You remain you. And that steadiness does more than any clever line ever could. It disarms without confrontation. It ends tests without acknowledgement. When you live this way, something powerful happens. You stop needing to prove strength because strength is visible in your restraint. You stop needing validation because your actions validate you. You stop fearing tests because they reveal nothing new about you. You already know who you are, and you show it every day in the same quiet way. This is the Stoic advantage. Not dominance, not detachment, consistency. Become predictable in your values and unshakable in your conduct. Let everything else fluctuate. When you do, you'll notice that tests lose their purpose. And when there's nothing left to test, respect takes its place. Women will test you, not because they want to break you, but because they want to see what you're made of. And now you understand the truth most men never learn. The test is never about pleasing, chasing, or proving. It's about self-command. As wrote, the best revenge is to be unlike him who performed the injury. In the same way, the best response to a test is not reaction, but restraint. Not ego, but clarity. Not fear, but quiet confidence. When you stay grounded, when you don't rush to explain yourself, when you don't bend just to be accepted, you pass without trying. And that's the paradox. The moment you stop performing, respect appears. Attraction follows discipline. Strength speaks without noise. Carry this with you. The next time you feel tested, don't ask, "How do I respond?" Ask instead, "Who do I choose to be right now?" That single question separates the reactive man from the stoic. If this video sharpened your perspective, stay with this path. Watch the next lesson. Apply what you've learned. And remember, master yourself and no test will ever shake you again.